Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Good morning, everybody. This is Conrad Chua with Rise to the Sun, where I share with you some of my thoughts about a big business event or tech launch, tech development when the sun rises. And today, the sunrise is at 6:27 here in Cambridge. I'm about 3 minutes late, but yeah, you can't schedule things right to the minute. Anyway, for today, I wanted to talk about pricing, specifically using the Apple iPhone 16e launch as a way to think about, well, what is pricing strategy? How does that relate to marketing, branding, and overall? If you're watching this live, whether on YouTube or LinkedIn, just drop any comments you have, questions you might have in the comments field. I'll try to address them as we go along. Now, what was this thing called the 16e? And why do I think it gives us an insight into the future for Apple, at least in the smartphone business? I've already talked about some of one of its underrated features, which is the fact that there's a new modem chip in the iPhone. Most people won't. I bet you 99.99% of all consumers who want to buy it, bought it, don't care. But I said in an earlier video, you can check it out, that it is the start of something quite significant for Apple. But today I'm just going to look at the pricing and think about what that means. So the first thing is the iPhone 16e was replacing the venerable SE model. The iPhone SE was launched at a price of $429 US. And this was about 3 years ago, so it was long overdue, a upgrade or replacement. Now the 16e comes in at $599, so that's $170 price increase. And when that was announced, everyone, all the journalists, the tech YouTubers were like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is a huge price increase. And how can you even call this a budget phone? You know, Apple, you're just so out of touch. You think that people who are going to buy almost $600 for US dollars for a phone, that's budget. But we need to take that broader view, all right? So let's think about this and think about our first order thinking, right? The first thing is there is this illusion of stable smartphone prices. Yeah. There seems to be this idea of like an almost unmovable bar that $999 or is it's the pro version has come at $999. You can't go any higher than that. Anything higher than that, oh my God, it's a great big thing. Or a base flagship performance model, maybe it's $799 US, so on. These sort of tiers, they've been there for years, right? And when you think about it, that's just not how things work in the real world. We have the price of eggs in America has just gone up tremendously, right? But nobody expects eggs to always stay the same, but maybe it's too much at the moment. Yeah. And then the other part is, smartphone prices weren't always like this. Apple has always been the one that pushes the boat on smartphone pricing. Every 5 or 6 years, when it feels it can do that, and other smartphone manufacturers follow suit. So, in a way, maybe this is a reflection. This first order thinking is a reflection that Apple is pricing in, all these huge price increases for components. Maybe for tariffs later on, right? The impact of tariffs. But let's think about the more strategic side, and we go on to our second order thinking, right? why is Apple pricing this in relation to its other models? So here we have a comparison, right, with the iPhone 16e, 16, and 16 Plus. Um, the 16 Pro is a bit more expensive. So you can see here that the 16e is priced at $599. The 16, the next thing up, is $799. Right? So if you think about it, put yourself in the shoes of an Apple store employee. You see somebody walking in, they're like, oh, my budget's not so great. Let me look, what's the cheapest thing? They say, what's the cheapest thing you have? Yeah. So you show them the 16e, you talk to them, and then they're like, oh, okay, $599. Then you can say, oh, for $200 more, you get the base model, right? And that gives you an extra camera, gives you more colors, it gives you all kinds of other jazz, right? And then that's an easier way for an employee to upsell, right, that customer from the E model to the base model. If you use the SE though, that becomes a very different segment because you're at $429, and it's a huge jump to get you to think about a $799 phone. So that's one of the principles of pricing, is that you put things in order. So to get consumers, obviously there'll be some consumers who definitely go for the 16e, but there'll also be some who were thinking of the 16e, but when they look at the range, the portfolio, they may be tempted. It's easier for you to upsell them to the $799. So that's, I think, one part of that second order thinking. The other part is think, well, who is this model, this new phone for? Now, many people have been coming in from the standpoint of retail customers, right, and thinking, why would someone who paid $429 before now want to pay $599? But actually, if you look at how Apple has been touting those improvements in the 16e, they've been going for people who have much older model phones, right? People who are still hanging on to their performance models from 5-6 years ago, or whatever. And for them, maybe they had never wanted to buy, when they bought their phones 5 years ago, they weren't looking at a budget, so-called budget phone like the SE. They were looking at those like an iPhone 11, which I had, or an iPhone 12. And now when they're thinking of getting a new model, they're thinking, okay, what should I get? Should I get the 16? Do I really need this? I've had my phone for so long. And maybe that's the segment that Apple is targeting for on the retail side, right? And I think that's a great video. You can watch it on YouTube, where there's so much confusion about this. Like, who is this for? And we have Marcus Brownlee, one of the top tech YouTubers, who plays two roles in this video. One is somebody who wants a specific, talks about the specific specs of that 16e, and the other is the world's most honest salesman who says, why don't you go and buy something else? So, but I think this shows the kind of confusion in the market about who this is for, and maybe Apple needs to do a better job. We don't know. Yeah. But the other part is, another customer segment that many people don't talk about is, maybe this phone is for enterprise customers. So businesses that purchase iPhones in bulk, right? They may find that there's a good balance of performance and price, and enterprise customers, they may not refresh their devices so often, right? And so the longevity of these updates, the fact that they're getting a top-of-the-line processor, or not top-of-the-line, but the most current processor, so that it's future-proof for any kind of updates later on, whether it's security or whether it's AI, means that maybe this would be a very compelling thing for an enterprise. But here on Rise of the Sun, we don't just look at two orders of thinking, we want to go even deeper. And for the third order of thinking, I was looking at, what does this mean for the pricing, but also the change in the naming conventions? Now, Apple has done away with the SE brand. They've gone all in on the 16e. And I think that's what they never even mentioned the SE. So I think they want consumers to see that the SE is gone. This is a new thing. It's a break from the past, right? And if you, in more ways than just the name, right? If you just look at the phone and compare it with the most recent base model, it looks almost the same from the outside. You know, yeah, sure, there's one camera less, but everything else looks the same. I think there's one button less on the side. Nobody can really tell. Whereas the SE was visibly different from the the most recent models, and they had to be because they were so much lower in the price point. Yeah, um, and if you were to unbox or tear open the phones, the 16E inside has the same kind of chip that the most current iPhones have. So performance-wise, it will be almost the same, and again, it's future-proofing. Whereas the SE had a much older processor. Right? So I think Apple is trying to signal to the market that now they won't have this so-called very cheap budget phone. Instead, they're going to have a cheaper version of the most up-to-date phones with a few features taken out. There's also another um, factor here, which is what does this mean for Apple's position in, let's say, this sub 500 market, right? Um, does this mean that Apple is not going to be able to compete anymore? And I think that's really what it means. Apple is saying it can no longer compete against the Chinese smartphone manufacturers who have really flooded the market, the sub $500 market, with pretty good Android phones, right? And I think Apple is saying they can't have a compelling proposition in that space, so they're going to be pulling out. Now, does this mean that Apple is going to pull out from all markets where purchasing power is not so strong, right? And we're relied on things like the SE. That's a big question, right? So if you are savvy looking at the financial side, you should look at whether Apple can continue to maintain that position in these weaker markets, let's say markets with weaker purchasing power. How does it do that? Does it continue to maybe sell the phones from 2 or 3 years ago, where it can discount and sell? Does it will the 16E help to bring customers in those markets onto that base, onto that most recent or the newest lineup without having to pay that extra $200 US, right? Which is a big thing for some markets. But yeah, it'll be interesting. And I think maybe in a year's time or maybe 6 months, when we look at Apple's earnings call, we can really see what that impact is, right? Look at, usually they'll talk about how the company has done in China. And so that's, again, it's been on a steady decline in the Chinese market. It will be interesting to see if that continues, especially when Apple no longer has that sub $500 phone. I personally believe that removing the SE will have no change, won't move a needle in terms of the larger forces, market forces at play for Apple in China, because I don't think many people in China were buying that SE to begin with. People wanted people see Apple as a premium brand, and they wanted that to get the latest and greatest, right? So that's my thoughts on the iPhone 16e. What is the pricing, the naming convention, what does it mean for Apple's strategy going forward? So, in conclusion, Apple no longer has a sub $500 device that you can buy from the Apple Store, but they've offered a cheaper way to get an iPhone with the latest chips, some of the latest features that will future-proof it for many years to come. So you don't have to buy that base model iPhone to get that. And if you have to ask, no, I won't be getting the 16e. My current phone is less than 2 years old, so I want to hang on to my phone for 5 years before upgrading, from the time of purchase. I'll get a new battery sometime, and that'll be good enough. And if you're serious about the environment, that's what you should do. Hang on to your tech stuff for far longer. Now, let me know what you think in the comments. And if you're watching this live, have a good weekend ahead. Love to hear from you what you think about the 16E, about pricing in general. What do you think? What does your company do for pricing? And yeah, have a great rest of the day.